So this is Tausha, and her story is insane. So one day, Tausha meets this guy, Mitch Kemp. And Tausha and Mitch Kemp, they fall in love, they get married, and they have a baby, a daughter. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out. So she quickly moves on and starts dating this guy, Greg. Now, Tausha has moved on from Mitch Kemp, but Mitch Kemp wants custody of their daughter. So there's a lot of tension and arguing over this, and it gets really heated between them. So Tausha comes up with a plan to end this custody battle once and for all. So one day, she lures Mitch Kemp out to her farm, and that's where Greg comes out of nowhere and he shoots him. Then Mitch Kemp dies, and they bury the body out on the farm. And at this point, no one knows Mitch Kemp is dead. They only think he's missing. So Tausha and Greg eventually sell that farm. It's in Missouri, and they move to a new house out of state. Then, one day, Greg has to go out of town for a while for work. And while Greg is out of town, Tausha starts hooking up with a new man. This guy, Keith. Then Greg comes home from out of town, and he finds Tausha together with Keith in his house. So Greg basically says, "F you," and he divorces her. So now Tausha's dating Keith, and she moves in with him. And one night, they're getting drunk. In fact, she gets so drunk, she ends up telling Keith the story of how she had her ex, Mitch Kemp, murdered, and how she had convinced Greg to do it. And Keith's like, whatever, she's probably just drunk, bullshitting. And eventually, Tausha and Keith's relationship gets a little rocky, and she meets this guy, Dwayne. So she starts seeing Dwayne while she's technically still living with Keith. So she sees Dwayne for about a month, and then she ends up moving into his house. And then Dwayne has to go to Keith's place to help her move her stuff out. So Dwayne and Keith meet. And it's fine, they're both nice guys, so they don't have any problems. So now Tausha is living with Dwayne, and they don't have any issues, and everything seems to be going fine now. Until one day, Dwayne starts noticing something weird about Tausha's mail. A lot of it shows her having a different last name. In fact, several different last names. And Dwayne's like, okay, why does she have so many last names? So he starts doing Google searches on her and some of these last names. And he finds an old marriage license between her and Mitch Kemp, the husband Greg had unalived. And this is news to Dwayne, because Tausha had always told him she had never been married. So Dwayne confronts her about it. And she has to admit that not only has she been married before, but she's been married 5 times. And Dwayne's like, damn, 5 times? Because she's only 31. But despite that, they keep dating, but it seems like Dwayne doesn't really trust her anymore. And then one day, something crazy happens. Tausha calls Dwayne, and she's like, remember my ex, Keith? Will you go pick him up and give him a ride to the hospital? He OD'd on meth. Because of course he did. And Dwayne's a nice guy, so he drives and he picks up Keith and takes him to the hospital. And Keith ends up being fine, but on the way out, Dwayne starts asking him about Tausha and her history. And Keith tells him a lot, but specifically, Keith tells him about the time Tausha got drunk and confessed to having her ex-husband Mitch Kemp murdered. And both Keith and Dwayne think that that's super weird, but probably a little too weird to be true. Then, fast forward to a few months later, and everything changes. Because Dwayne discovers that Tausha's been cheating on him with another man. Shocker. So he breaks up with her and he kicks her out of the house. After the breakup, one night Dwayne's at home and he's on his computer. And he happens to have access to her social media accounts. So he starts looking through her messages. And he finds messages to Tausha from family members of Mitch Kemp. Apparently, Mitch Kemp had been missing for a year, and those family members had been writing Tausha over and over again, asking her if she had heard from him. And Dwayne's suddenly like, holy shit, maybe Tausha did have Mitch Kemp murdered. So Dwayne prints out the messages, he takes them to police, and he tells them everything he knows. And police start investigating. So first, they gotta go find Tausha so they can question her. But by that time, Tausha has moved, and she's living in Alabama with yet a new boyfriend. So police find her, they bring her in, they question her, like, hey, do you know where Mitch Kemp is? And she says no, but she keeps changing her story. And after a lot of pressure from police, she eventually admits that, yeah, Mitch Kemp is dead. But she says it wasn't her who unalived him. And she starts putting all the blame on her other ex-husband, Greg. And police are like, well, can you help us locate the body? Because from the police's perspective, it's hard to prosecute a murder when you don't have a body. And eventually, Tausha gives in and she's like, sure, I'll show you where the body is. Because she thinks helping police find Mitch Kemp's body will help her get out of trouble. So they fly her out to Missouri and she shows them where Mitch Kemp's body is buried. And now police have a body. So now they can charge her with murder. So they immediately arrest her. Here's her mugshot. They also arrest Greg. Here's his mugshot. They all go to trial. Greg testifies against her, saying that she was the mastermind behind the whole murder. And Greg gets 19 years while Tausha is sentenced to life. That is wild. Shout out to Alabama, Florida, and Missouri.